allowed to train as a warrior, and she is instead forced to join the healers as part of her female role. This question can apply not just to different cultures, but religious orders, social classes, even clubs at universities. A world can feel rigid if everyone uses magic the same way, despite their differences. The mystical and less scientific nature of magic naturally invites superstition fueled by sociological, economic, and religious ideas. However, this can be taken too far. Relying too heavily on distinguishing two cultural groups by how they interact with your magic system can leave the world-building feeling rigid. The reader is left wondering why everything revolves around magic to a T. As an author and world-builder, consider two questions. 1. How does the magic system affect the world? 2. How does the world affect the magic system? Magic systems and narrative. Above all else, there is narrative. I am not someone to write in absolutes, but if I were to pick one, this would be it. Elements of a story are included or excluded in the creative and editing processes because they do or do not serve the elusive narrative. Because of this, one way to integrate your magic system into your story is to use its rules, nuances, and mysteries to guide the events of the plot and the arc of the narrative. 25. A magic system is just one slab of concrete in the foundation of your work. What you build atop that is wholly up to you. This leads to one problem that world builders, especially obsessive ones, can run into. To be clear, there is nothing wrong with primarily enjoying your world-building process, or at least enjoying it more than the writing part. The only obligation you have as a writer is to write the story you want the way you want. If that means the primary object of your story is your world-building, then so be it. This does not mean your book will have a good story. It may suffer for it, but it is not wrong. There is no should in the creative process here. However, some indie world builders, who may also wish to write a good story, particularly those I have seen take the self-publishing route, see integrating their magic system with their world building as sufficient, that as long as the reader can see the magic system impacting the background of the story, and how the world works, that the tiers of magical ability create a class system, for example, that its role has been adequately considered. This is not so true. How the magic system affects the story itself is a wholly different question, and important in a wholly different way, whereas your world building is about realism, and this engrossing difference, the narrative is the meat of the experience for the reader. Considering your magic system in the former but not the latter can leave the story lacking. Instead, exploring in detail how the magic either creates or changes conflicts that your characters experience can be really interesting. Sanderson puts this down to the hypothetical, what happens if, question. What happens to royal families when magic always requires royal blood? What happens to state borders when magic users can teleport around the world freely? What happens to the class system when even peasants can use magic to overthrow their lords and ladies? One of the best examples in Avatar is, what happens to prisons when people can bend the elements in the world around them? Prisons are commonly constructed from mortar, concrete, metal, and stone. In the episode The Runaway, Katara has a cunning plan that promptly gets both her and Toph thrown into prison. Normally, Toph, being an earthbender and metalbender, could bend her way out of it, but the Fire Nation has adapted and constructed wooden prisons, a material she is unable to bend. Katara must use the magic system in a new and innovative way to escape, something we will discuss a little more later in this part. In Season 3 of The Legend of Korra, the firebender Peely cannot be kept in a normal prison, because of her ability to generate explosions that would destroy the structure around her. Because of this, she is imprisoned in a freezing cave, deep in the ice, kept so cold that she is unable to generate even a spark. Likewise, the waterbender Minghua is kept in a dry and volcanic prison to prevent access to water. The standard prison escape story is changed by the presence of the magic system. The bending magic system here alters both what the problem the characters face is and how they solve it. Imagine an architect is putting together their plans for a house. This house has timber framing, and every beam and truss has its place, providing a functional benefit to the overall property, making it stronger in a storm or supporting a new room in the design. But there is a single wooden beam sticking out of the north-facing side of the framing. It is part of the architect's design, but it adds no functional practicality, and people are left asking what its purpose is. Or what it really adds. It may not even make the house aesthetically pleasing. This allegory, if you have not guessed, is about how you use magic systems in your narrative. Fundamentally, if a magic system feels like it could be removed or replaced in the story without altering the challenges characters encounter, and how they must confront them, then it can feel isolated from the narrative, serving no functional or even aesthetic purpose. Not only does creating challenges that arise from the mechanics of your magic system help prevent this, but it is the nuances of your magic system, hard or soft, that allow you as an author to explore unique challenges that cannot take place in any other story, which is fantastic, because it makes your work stand out on its own. A narrative centered around a unique and novel conflict is even more engrossing than merely world-building with a unique and novel magic system. You can write it so one flows from the other. Magic systems and scope. It is important to keep in mind the scope of your what happens if question. Sanderson put this in his own words. Epic fantasy has space for looking at history and economics, while a tight urban fantasy may instead want to look at one specific factor, such as how synthetic blood might affect vampire culture. I do not necessarily agree with this entirely. Stories are told from the perspective of characters, and whether in those characters exist in an epic fantasy or a young adult novel, their perspective is limited. What matters less in defining your what happens if question is not abstract genre, but the circumstance and perspective of your character. A tax collector in a young adult fantasy novel will be far better equipped to look at economics than a peasant in an epic fantasy. However, there is still some truth to Sanderson's point: the fewer the characters, smaller the world, and shorter the book, the narrower the question might be. Magic systems and characterization. Another way is to integrate the magic system with your story is with your character arcs. This is by no means necessary to creating a good story, and it only fits with particular types of fantasy stories and magic systems, but boy, is it extraordinarily common. How many times has the gallant hero with gorgeous eyes and a magical sword not been able to harness his full power until he has mastered his anger, pride, or hormones? One of the best examples of this in Avatar comes from Prince Zuko in perhaps the most incredible scene in the series. The following extract is taken from the episode The Day of Black Sun Part 2, The Eclipse. Ozai, calmly. Perhaps. Now I realize that banishment is far too merciful a penalty for treason. Ozai closes his eyes. Shot fades to outside where the solar eclipse begins to end. Your penalty will be far steeper. Fade briefly to show the eclipse ending. Fade to Ozai as he opens his eyes, and in split seconds, generates lightning, firing the bolt at Zuko. Zuko slides back several feet from the impact of the bolt, yet manages to redirect it, sending it back to right in front of his father. The resulting explosion causes the Fire Lord to slam into the back wall, where he falls over and raises his head, his face distorted in rage as flames from the lightning attacks around him. The flag behind him falls, and the camera cuts to a shot of the room, revealing that Zuko had made his escape. Prior to this, Zuko had not been shown to be able to bend lightning in any way, either generating it or redirecting it. In the Season 2 episode Bitter Work, Zuko is told, Iroh, you will not be able to master lightning until you have dealt with the turmoil inside you. Zuko, you must let go of your feelings of shame if you want your anger to go away. Later in the story, having grappled with his inner demons for a long time, he confronts his abusive father to say, Zuko, for so long, all I wanted was for you to love me, to accept me. I thought it was my honor I wanted, but really, I was just trying to please you. You, my father, who banished me just for talking out of turn. Points a broadsword at his father. My father, who challenged me, a 13-year-old boy, to an Agni Kai. Cuts to shot of Ozai, looking angered. How could you possibly justify a duel with a child? We've created an era of fear in the world. And if we don't want the world to destroy itself, cuts to shot of Zuko. We need to replace it with an era of peace and kindness. In this line, Zuko has dealt with the turmoil inside of him, letting go of his feelings of shame that his father tortured him with, choosing a new path for himself. Reaching this point in his character arc, he becomes able to redirect lightning back at Fire Lord Ozai, as the episode Bitter Work implies. 26. See the footnote for more thoughts on this. Tying your magic system to character growth gives more weight to the character arc by emphasizing its importance in them becoming stronger and overcoming challenges. This allegorical approach of physical power being accompanied by mental maturity, or the like, is an old one. In Quest del Saint Graal, a chair at King Arthur's table incinerates all those who sit in it except the one who will surpass all other knights in both character and physical prowess. This approach also places magical prowess secondary to character growth. This works particularly well in coming-of-age stories like Avatar, The Last Airbender, because it is all about characters learning about their powers and themselves. Even so, be careful. It is important to note that the more consequential the character change or greater the power, the more it should be foreshadowed beforehand, or it risks feeling cheap and unearned. Why might you not want to use this? 1. This setup works less well if your protagonist already has established powers from the beginning, or you do not want their magic to necessarily follow the same path they take as a person. The story of Jean Grey in X-Men is a fascinating inversion of this. She somewhat fears her immense dark powers despite being kind-hearted. 2. This setup makes the mechanics of your magic system softer, because character change is far less quantifiable in determining the powers of your characters. It can often lead to moments where simply being moral or reaching a certain epiphany grants them the power to do X, even though others may not be able to do X when they act the same way. The subjective element is far stronger, meaning external rules to your magic system may take a back seat if the author is not careful. It may not be the way you want to go if you want a very hard and predictable magic system. The bending magic system mechanics. Like most magic systems, bending strikes a balance somewhere in the middle of spectrum from hard to soft, leaning towards hard. Let us see how it stacks up against our discussions in previous parts. To reiterate Sanderson's first law, an author's ability to solve conflict with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. Throughout the series, bending is often used to solve problems, but the reason this works so well is because of two things: predictability and consistency. The writers never show the characters bending radically inconsistent amounts of their element or displaying radically inconsistent bending skills as the plot demands. The viewer understands roughly what each of the members of Team Avatar are capable of when they come up against challenges. Inconsistency in powers leaves a reader asking, why didn't a character do X when they could do it before? Crucially, where a character does not use skills we know they have to solve problems, there is a clear reason laid out. For example, Katara refuses to bloodbend for moral reasons. These reasons do not always need to be perfectly logical or rational. People are not perfectly logical or rational. It could be due to superstition, personal moral values, fear, anxiety, or simply because they prefer using one kind of power over another. Avatar also sticks pretty closely to Sanderson's second law. Limits are more important than powers. From the first episode, we understand a number of limits to the bending magic system. 1. You can only bend one element unless you are the Avatar. 2. You cannot conjure the element from thin air unless you bend fire. 3. Your abilities are limited by technique and training. However, a major feature of the show is that it questions the boundaries of the elements, like blood for waterbending, metal for earthbending, or lightning for firebending. Though they become crucial abilities in the story that solve problems for the characters, they never feel like a wizard did it, because the writers spent a long time establishing that these boundaries could be pushed. In the first episode, The Boy in the Iceberg, we learn that waterbenders can also bend ice as an extension of water. In the episode Imprisoned, we learn that earthbenders can bend coal as an extension of earth. In the episode The Swamp, we learn waterbending extends to plant bending. Just as the characters figure out how to push the boundaries of their element, so could the viewer. By the time we reach the runaway in Season 3, it is a logical conclusion for waterbenders to bend sweat. Avatar, The Last Few Problems. While I love both The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra with all my heart, soul, and chakras, they did not always get their magic system right. The clearest example of this is what happened with spirit-bending and energy-bending in Season 2 of The Legend of Korra. In the climax of that story, after having the Avatar spirit, Rava, ripped out of her, Korra feels powerless to stop Unavatu, the Dark Avatar. Then, because what kind of do-or-die moment would it be without a pep talk, Tenzin takes her over to the Tree of Time, and a number of things happen. The following interaction takes place. Tenzin, let go of your attachment to who you think you are, and connect with your inner spirit. Korra, haven't you heard anything I said? Rava is gone. I'm not connected to her spirit anymore. Tenzin, I'm not talking about Rava. Rava is not who you are. The Tree of Time remembers all. Korra, the most powerful thing about you is not the spirit of Rava, but your own inner spirit. You have always been strong, unyielding, fearless. Korra, Avatar WAN. Tenzin, before he fused with Rava, WAN was just a regular person. Korra, but he was brave, and smart, and always wanted to defend the helpless. Tenzin, that's right. He became a legend because of who he was, not what he was. He wasn't defined by Rava any more than you are. Korra, everyone in Republic City is in danger. Tenzin, you have to help them, Korra. Korra, how? We're halfway around the world. Tenzin, do as the ancients once did. Connect to the cosmic energy of the universe. Don't bend the elements, but the energy within yourself. Firstly, this passage does super weird things with the law which frustrate me, but would be useless to get into here. Secondly, tying the new abilities she then unlocks, which include a powerful form of astral projection and some new kind of energy manipulation, to character growth simply does not work. The struggle for Korra to be a brave, and smart, and always want to defend the helpless was not a character struggle for Korra explored in this season. 27 Korra is clearly brave, smart, and motivated to defend the helpless. Perhaps the struggle is accepting herself without Rava. But this too carries little weight. She only just learned who Rava was, and while Korra has defined herself as the avatar for her whole life, this was not the focus of her character arc this season. Thirdly, after supposedly suffering such a devastating tragedy less than an hour before, her changing to accept this after one pep talk and gaining fantastical new powers feels cheap and unearned. In no way did Korra progressively work past this throughout the season. The conflict is essentially introduced in the final episode and resolved in the final episode, meaning the connection between resolving that personal character conflict and the conflict within the plot is weak at best. Fourthly, the final line from Tenzin about connecting to the cosmic energy of the universe and bending the energy within oneself is meant to hark back to the energy bending we saw in Avatar, The Last Airbender in the final episodes. Energy bending gave Aang the ability to give or take away bending abilities, but nothing more. 28 While it is a mysterious ability, there is no precedent in the series for what happens next in this scene from the Legend of Korra. The viewer is left asking, why did Korra just become huge? When was that a power energy bending had? Why can she touch things if she is astrally projecting? Is she bending her bending abilities to do this? What? In other words, there is no predictability or consistency in the magic system here. Meaning it feels more like a wizard did it when resolving the plot. Fifthly, the imagery in this scene, which, if you have not seen, depicts Korra walking along a narrow bridge towards a large astral version of herself, is meant to recall the imagery from Season 2 of Avatar, The Last Airbender. However, this too is an inconsistent and weird piece of the magic system to recall. In the original series, this imagery was a metaphor for attaining enlightenment and complete control of the Avatar state, not connecting to one's inner spirit. It is arguably antithetical to what we saw in The Last Airbender, where Korra is learning to be herself without the Avatar spirit, and was fully embracing his role as the Avatar. This scene is inconsistent with what has already been established, leaving the audience feeling like Korra could have any power that the plot required her to have. Fundamentally, none of these powers have the limits, costs, or weaknesses that give them the certainty, predictability, or consistency needed for a satisfying end. The whole scene with Tenzin is intended to justify what follows, and it does so using spiritual jargon that says a lot but does not really mean anything to the viewer. It reads as magibabble when you look at it for more than 2 seconds. This is like technobabble, but with magic. It uses words and concepts that we might recognize, but it does not truly mean anything in universe. But all of this is not actually the biggest problem with the ending to Season 2. While it is an example of unpredictable and badly written soft magic, Tenzin's speech and much of what follows does not actually solve the main conflict in the story, stopping Unavatu. It just facilitates the battle that follows, and having soft magic do that is far more okay. Korra teleports herself to Republic City and begins the final showdown with Unavatu. Then, just as Korra is about to lose, lo and behold Christ descends from the heavens in the shape of Jinora screaming a wizard did it. When all seems lost, Jinora suddenly appears and shows Korra how to find Rava again. Why could she do that? It is established she has vague spiritual powers and that she is Korra's spiritual mentor, but the limits of her abilities are almost completely unspecified, and there is certainly no indication she can do such things as this. These are beyond the powers of anyone else we have seen this season, and beyond anything we have seen Jinora herself do. It is established that Rava will grow inside Vaatu, so this is not unexpected, but the link between Jinora and Korra is narratively weak. An author's ability to solve crucial problems with magic in the story is proportional to how well the reader understands the magic, and Jinora's powers have virtually no cost, limit, predictability, or consistency. Summary. 1. A magic system cannot exist in isolation. Consider how it can be worked in with your world-building, narrative, and characters. 2. If you can remove your magic system, and your world-building will not change, then it is possible you have not considered its implications deeply enough. World-building is a many-way street. It is not simply about how magic systems affect politics, history, geography, and culture, but how those things affect the magic system. 3. Exploring in detail how the magic either creates or changes conflicts that your characters experience in the narrative can be really interesting. Your magic system is a source of conflict unique to your story, and as an author, you can capitalize on that. 4. Tying your magic system to character growth gives more weight to the character arc by emphasizing its importance in them becoming stronger and overcoming challenges. This approach also places magical prowess secondary to character growth. It is important to note that the more consequential the character change or greater the power, the more it should be foreshadowed beforehand, or it risks feeling cheap and unearned. However, if you want a wholly hard magic system, or you do not wish a character's powers to take the same path as their character arc, then perhaps this is not the setup for you. 5. Magibabble is where a character says a lot but means very little, and it is a thin veil for bad writing, particularly where authors write themselves into a corner. Part 12. Polytheistic religions. The A Song of Ice and Fire series by G.R. Martin, Avatar, The Last Airbender by Michael DiMartino, and Brian Konietzko, The Dragonlance series by Margaret Weiss, and Tracy Hickman, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, American Gods by Neil Gaiman, Small Gods by Terry Pratchett, The Heroes of Olympus series by Rick Riordan, The Elder Scrolls series by Bethesda, Mythopoeia by J.R.R. Tolkien, Supernatural by Eric Kripalinium by David Eddings, Princess Mononoke by Hayao Miyazaki, Fullmetal Alchemist by Hiromu Orokawa, Cthulhu Mythology, The Goblin Emperor. It is a staple trope of the fantasy genre to feature really interesting and intricate religions, and this part will focus on polytheism, where there are multiple gods. Examples include the Greek and Norse pantheons in Western religion, and Japanese Shintoism and Hinduism in Eastern religion. In discussing religion, its tendencies, and its place in history, readers should approach any generalization made here with caution. Each part, adapted from a script written for YouTube, requires a brevity and style that will not always do the topic justice. However, I have endeavored to remain neutral and factual. Above all, I advise you to do further reading in while building your own religion. We will be splitting this complex topic into 12 points. 1. The religious beliefs. 2. Variation in religious beliefs. 3. How polytheistic religions spread. 4. Religion and culture. 5. Polytheism and magic systems. 6. Religion and politics. 7. Religion and the economy. 8. Narrative tension and mythopoeia. 9. Religious tropes and models. 10. The spectrum, superior or otherworldly. 11. Character development. 12. The gods do not exist. Religious beliefs. Most authors know that, when while building a religion, the religion needs to have some form of belief. But more importantly, it is critical to understand one thing when coming up with this religious philosophy: religion is complicated. All religions have a belief, value, or philosophy of some kind, and most well-building religion resources I have come across focus on saying that a religion should answer 3 questions. 1. How did the world come to be? 2. How should we act towards one another? 3. What happens when we die? In Christianity, God brought about the heavens and the earth. We should do unto others as we would have done to us, and we either go to heaven or hell. To be clear, these questions are not requirements for well-building a religion. This is a particularly reductionist way of approaching it, and it is unfortunately Eurocentric. In G.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, the religion of the many-faced God believes in the principle that death is a mercy, not a curse, but it has nothing to say how the world was created, where we go when we die, and it has little to say on how we should interact with one another. These 3 questions are almost entirely avoided, but it makes for an interesting religion nonetheless. While it is true that many real-world religions focus on these 3 questions, that does not mean your fictional one has to answer all or any of them. Your religion may focus on only one of these questions or focus on other ideas entirely. Religion is not limited to these 3 questions, and limiting yours to them can, but will not certainly, make it feel cut and paste, as if you as the author are filling in blanks on a form. Variation in religious beliefs. It is unlikely that all of the religion's adherents will agree on what these beliefs are, whether they answer the aforementioned questions or not, and this can play a critical role in world building. This can be because of interpretation of religious texts, accepting or denying certain prophets, one group emphasizing certain values while another group emphasizes others, or any number of other reasons. Even if the gods themselves came down and explained what they meant, the likelihood of everyone getting the same message is virtually nil. This is only compounded by the nature of polytheistic religions, because it is common for gods to represent different principles, values, or ideas, meaning followers naturally divide themselves into groups that align with certain gods with certain values. In the Dragonlance series, Magir represents faith and meditation, while Kirajolith represents courage and heroism. There is not a single religious institution, single religious authority, or single religious group. Rather, Magir has very few followers who are mostly monks and priests, while Kirajolith has a large group of followers who are mostly warriors. We can also see the world-building tying religion to the economy here. The continent of Ansalon is often plagued by war and conflict. The fact that so many are employed as soldiers means that the warrior god holds greater sway. And within these different sects, who is to say there are not different interpretations of the same god? Depending on what your fictional society values, some gods in your pantheon may be portrayed as more important, and this may affect how much political power that group has, cultural capital, financial influence, and how ingrained their institutional traditions and practices are in society. But what makes a society value certain things, and thereby certain gods more? This is often simplified to what a society values morally, like wisdom or courage, especially where an author uses the warrior civilization, a Spartan trope. But history has shown it is more complex than that. The Avatar, the last Airbender mythology does this extremely well. Geography. Often, it is simply to do with what makes living in a certain landscape difficult. In the episode The Painted Lady, a small river village relies entirely on its fish supply from the Jianghui River to survive, so they emphasize the Painted Lady, a freshwater river spirit who protects the river, over other spirits. Egypt is a largely dry and arid area, so during the time of the Egyptian pantheon, people revered Hapi, the god of the Nile who was responsible for the annual flooding that ensured a good harvest and a sufficient water supply. It is easy to focus on the grand abstract morals or virtues of a society like honor, bravery, and community, but the average peasant is going to care less about that and more about whether they can feed their family. If sacrifices to the god of the forest ensure that more than sacrifices to the god of honor, then it is unlikely they will act otherwise. Not only are their personal realistic needs more connected to that kind of god, but the powers that be would be more motivated to use that religious idea to further their own goals. It is through this that one god takes precedence in a society. Economy. In ancient Chinese mythology, Kanzhen, the god of the silkworm, rose to prominence because of how critical their control of the silk trade was to their prosperity as a people. They concluded it must be divine. Culture. In Avatar, the last Airbender, the water tribes reveres the moon and ocean spirits who gave them waterbending and embody the values of balance, yin and yang, and cooperation, which are important in their religious philosophy. At various points, we learn of the vital importance of community to the water tribe and how these spirits best reflect that. An author can simultaneously demonstrate the diversity of gods and the diversity of culture within a people group by showing how different groups interpret the gods. A society may emphasize or worship a few gods of the pantheon more for economic, political, or geographical reasons, even if the mythology itself does not necessarily support this stronger emphasis. One figure may technically be the head of pantheon, but another may be more important to the people themselves. Just as religion shapes society, society helps decide the form that religion takes. How much variation in belief should there be when building your religion? 3 important factors to consider are: 1. Territory. 2. The number of followers. 3. Age of the religion. The smaller the territory, the less variation there will be, because 2 different interpretations are unlikely to flourish in the same space. This is why splits within the Christian Church are also largely geographical, with Protestantism taking a firm grasp of Northern Europe, Catholicism firmly grasping Southern Europe, and Orthodoxy firmly grasping Eastern Europe. Likewise, the fewer the followers, the more likely there will be agreement between them all on central principles and values. There are fewer to persuade, and it is a lot more difficult to branch off when few adherents will go with you. While one might think that the younger a religion is, the less time it has had for it to be challenged and evolve, there is a counterfactual element to remember. Religions also begin with a lot of uncertainty, as they figure out things that may not have been explicitly pronounced on or dictated in their inception. They are quite literally still in the process of formation. Early Christianity did not have the Bible as a compilation of its scriptural beliefs, and it lacked any central institutional authority to give it a rigid structure. If your young religion has values it believes in, like loving one's neighbor as yourself, has it yet figured out how to structure its authorities, and what powers or interpretation or spiritual gifts do those authorities have? An older religion has had more time to figure these things out. This does not necessarily mean they will have, but there is a greater chance for it. How do polytheistic religions spread? The problem with answering this question with any real certainty is that many polytheistic religions did not spread, or they grew in societies with few written records.